Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Carter DeLoro. I'm from New York City. I went to Pomona College for undergrad, and I worked in admissions at Pomona and Occidental. I've been a school-based counselor across New England and the Midwest, and I'm currently the co-director of college counseling at the Marymount School of New York.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
Hi, I'm Lisa, a clinical psychologist and a college counselor and a co-author of the book, The Calm College Method. I have one daughter who's graduated from college, one daughter who's about to go to college, and a son who's about to go to high school.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good morning, friends. I hope you're in a great mood today. I know I sure am because I love spring. Earlier today, this morning, I said to Nitra, I'm just going to take a day off. I'm not going to work on any beautifying of the grounds. And then I go out there, and then I'm out there. You start tinkering. And so I come in like 3 hours later, and she's like, I knew you were not going to go out there for only a few minutes. I'm like, why? Because I know you. So I have a new obsession. It's Japanese maples. I stopped by a local landscaper, and I had to pick up a couple. Anitra calls him my best friend. His name's Larry. He's in his 50th year, so he knows so much. He just kind of can go pick his brain. But he was saying to me, if I could only grow one thing, I would grow Japanese maples. So if you're into gardening, I highly recommend the Emperor One or the Bloodgood. They kind of grow more upright. So that's kind of my latest thing. So I'm just out there tinkering away, working on them. So yeah, I'm feeling great. And I'm excited about our episode today. Some episodes excite me a little bit more than others, and I'm really excited about this interview. We have a brand new interview, which I'll get to in a second, and we have a brand new roundtable for you guys today. A couple quick announcements. 10 days away from the Colorado event, 10 days. And we've never had an event before. We've brought together representatives from 4 schools, but that's right. CU Boulder, Colorado College. We've also got Elon, and we've also got Grinnell. So you'll have 4 different reps helping you understand how to read admissions files, take your questions. It's in Lafayette, Colorado, which is equidistant, really almost between Boulder and Denver. You can sign up by going to yourcollegeboundkid.com under the events tab. And friends, I just have to say thank you. I think I did 7 thank yous, and that was intentional because, I made an announcement last week. Because I love the podcast, but it's a lot of work. And I was thinking to myself, I know our listeners. Our listeners are really awesome. Some of the things I'm doing, I probably could delegate. So I made an announcement, last week, looking for a couple volunteers. I particularly just mentioned a couple of things, helping create more of like a better table of contents, really on the yourcollegeboundkid.com website. Because sometimes someone will say, I know you've done an episode on this, but I can't find it. So I'm thinking we probably could up our game there. And then I know I got a zillion people that I want to interview. Some of our team members would also be willing to do some of those interviews. But I never really get around to asking certain people. I grab the low-hanging fruit. Like I'll grab people I see at conferences or people in my network, people I bump into. But there's other people I want to interview that just I might not see at a conference. I might not bump into them. They may not be in my network. And so I put out that announcement last week, and I kid you not, by the time I checked my email in the morning, 5 people had already said I'd love to volunteer. And then a couple more trickled in one later that day, and then another one the next day. And so, yeah, I've already met with 4 of the 7, and I've got another couple of meetings coming up here. So we're putting them to work to help improve the quality of the podcast for you guys. So I want to get right into today's content. I really do, because I'm excited about it. So, Carter, Susan, and I did a roundtable discussion on Standard Strong. What is Standard Strong? And if you are Standard Strong, what are some things you can do to experience success in the college admission process? And so for 5 weeks, we're going to be discussing that. And I want to get this content to you so quickly that I'm not going to do 5 straight Mondays. Instead, I'm going to ping pong Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday. So, so you'll hear it for 5 straight episodes, not 5 straight Mondays. So you'll hear part 1 of 5 today of that discussion. And then I'm very excited about this interview Lisa has with Jennifer Gershberg. We get a lot of people that reach out to us to be on the podcast. And I'd say of all those people that reach out to us, we turn down the overwhelming majority of them. They might be great for another podcast, but they're not necessarily great for what we're trying to do. We probably accept about 2%. But when Jennifer Gershberg reached out to me, I really liked what she had to say. It caught my attention. And so a lot of times I'll be like, Lisa, do you want to do a little investigating for me on these? Because she's really good. If they've written a book, Lisa will read it. And so Jennifer Gershberg had come up with her own course on how to excel in college. She's a former attorney and a former professor at the University of Maryland. And Lisa literally went through the course and then said, we need to have Jennifer on. So over the next 2 weeks, Lisa will be interviewing Jennifer Gershberg on how to excel. Mostly academically, but it actually extends beyond just academically while you're in college. So, this is obviously good for a graduating high school senior transitioning to college. It's also really good for college students. So spread the word. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this interview. And without any further ado, let's transition to my conversation with Carter and Susan on what is Standard Strong? And if you're Standard Strong, what can you do about it?
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friend, as I mentioned, this is going to be a 5-part roundtable, which we're going to run 2 a week. Monday, Thursday, finishing up on a Monday. In part 1, Susan describes the dilemma students face, and she gives a preview of the content we're going to cover over the next 5 weeks. Susan shares a few admissions vernacular words for us. What is 3-3? What is bread and butter? Susan defines Standard Strong for us. And then we begin a conversation that will continue for 5 weeks. What can a Standard Strong student do to stand out in the admission process at very selective colleges? I share a few thoughts I have on that initially, and Carter shares his thoughts as well. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Susan Tree and Carter DeLauro. Hi, Susan. Hi, Carter.
Hey, Mark and Carter.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Susan.
I'm very excited about this. We're going to do our best to almost take you to as if you were at a NACAC conference initially, which is our national training conference for college counselors, admissions professionals that 6,000 to 7,000 attend every year. It'll be in Minneapolis this year. And last year, Susan did a presentation. I'll let her tell a little more, joined by some colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And it was so popular, the room literally packed out, and they actually had to do it again. People were banging the doors down to get in. And so we thought as listeners that you might find it helpful as well. So we're going to let Susan present, and Carter and I are going to sort of ask questions and interact with it. So Susan, why don't you tee up the question? I will say this, Julie and I visited this topic over 2 years ago, and it was one of the most popular topics we got response on. So Susan, why don't you read the description of the NACAC proposal, and we'll start from there.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this with our listeners, because I think everything we talk about on the podcast, Mark and Carter, somehow relates to this, because what parents are interested in is how can they help their kids prepare for the college admissions process and be a viable candidate where they would like to go. That's was the same a million years ago when we all started in this profession, and it's the same today. And I think what we as college counselors wrestle with continually are what we call expectation management. Colleges are fixated on enrollment management, and college counselors and guidance counselors, school counselors are trying to help families manage their expectations, because obviously we all want families to feel empowered and to reach for what their child desires. We're all parents. We want our kids to be inspired. Anyway, what is seldom addressed is this phenomenon of what has happened with grade inflation, the media fixation on college admissions. All of these have good and bad sides, right? They're, the testing, the world of standardized testing and coaching and AI now, and the new things that are coming down the pike. But all these things have contributed to a lot of really well-qualified kids applying to college these days. They've always been there, but there hasn't been, as we know, this fixation on, say, 40 colleges and universities. I'm probably being a little generous with 40 or 50.
Think if you include the liberal arts, you get the, as opposed to National University, then 40 is definitely a fair number.
And here we are in March Madness, with the basketball. Sure. And Long Island University next year is going to get a lot of applications. A little national media attention goes a long way in helping colleges advance their image, and anyway, so on and so forth. But what has been on my heart for a lot of years, both in terms of a reader of applications for some selective colleges, but also as a college counselor and a coach, is this phenomenon of really superlative, high-achieving kids not getting into the most selective colleges. I mean, a lot of us are on these Facebook groups and blog sites, and right now with decisions starting to pour in, the parents. These are a mixed source of information, right? We talked about that with Kate, right? The parent Facebook and different groups. But these are full right now of parents saying, my kid has a 4.0, 18 AP classes, 3 varsity sports, walks on water, saves whales, you name it, and got waitlisted at 3 schools and denied at whatever. And of course, people like us know how much more there is to this presentation than that, right? But our hearts bleed for these families, because in the parent's mind, this is a reward-based process, right? Parents have done the work, they've gotten a promotion, hopefully. You do certain things and you get rewarded. And if we think of college admission as a reward, that's of course the place where we make our first. It's not a prize to be won, Mark, right?
I love it. So Susan, read the description. I love the description. I think it'll let our listeners know some of the stuff we'll talk about today.
So all that said, I wanted parents to know that I'm on their side.
Yes.
On this, even though I'm part of the evil empire in a way. We all know and love them, the standard strong applicants who have done it all. Excellent achievement in rigorous courses, significant engagement in school and community activities, and an abundance of positive personal qualities. Everyone's expectations are high. Described by highly rejective colleges as, quote, generically spectacular. They are not admitted in big numbers, and there are a lot of them. They are not being recruited, are not underrepresented, and are not on the brink of fame. In the most competitive segment of the applicant pool, they compete with similarly accomplished students. So, Mark, one of your favorite sayings is respect the competition. Mm-hmm. And I guess my takeaway from that is that what I just read, this is the most selective population cohort in a highly selective colleges applicant pool. When I was at Bates years ago, colleges have rating systems, rubrics, right, to quantify the evaluation of an application. It eliminates the subjectivity and increases reliability across readers. For those of you who are statisticians out there, reliability of ratings is very important. That's why there's a lot of training. But we had a saying in the office for students who were a little above the midpoint of the applicant pool in terms of their academic credentials and their personal qualities, which are rated. They are quantified in the evaluation of an application. And these wonderful kids were called 3-3s. They were rated 3 academic. I'm only sharing this because it's been a long time and I know their rating system is different. It doesn't matter. 3 academic, 3 personal. And we would pass each other in the hallway in the admissions office on the way to committee, and someone would say, "Yeah, are you bringing that awesome, kid from Hartford to committee today or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to fight like crazy. I really want to see if we can, find a spot for her in the class, but she's a 3-3." And that spoke volumes about her position in the applicant pool, right? Meaning she was above average, but she was what we would call bread and butter, totally solid, totally appealing. Everything about her made her a desirable member of the college community. And about 25% of the 3-3s would eventually get in. That was a long time ago. Yeah, that's why ratings have become more fine-tuned and more very much more specific than kind of these gross academic personal rating scales. The colleges I've read for in recent time had, as a reader, I assigned no fewer than 15 ratings, which boiled down to 3 super ratings.
Whoa.
So that the system, because of the enormity of applicant pools and the fine tuning of institutional priorities and what colleges are looking for as they build a class at a highly selective school. Some of those priorities are known and some of them are private. We've talked about that a lot on the podcast. The ratings have become, a finer tuned, and all that puts pressure on this group that is qualified and very, very appealing and deserving, but there just is not room for them. In some cases, there's not room for any of them. By the time a college admits its students who are recruited, and that can be for a million different things, right? That's some of it's obvious, like those guys playing in the NCAA tournament, where colleges put money on the table for the most part in order to have that time on television, which earns them lots of applications.
Yeah,
but it's just some colleges admit hardly any of these kids, which we have affectionately come to call standard strong, because I feel they they deserve to be identified as really eminently well qualified and appealing, desirable. But they are the very kids that get squeezed out. And parents often say to us, but my student has a higher grade average or better scores or is president of the senior class. And they are wait list is kind of the destination, right? Because colleges would love to admit these kids if they have room, but that's kind of the destination of the standard strong. Some get in, as I said, maybe 10%, or who knows? I shouldn't say that. Sure. But why did that other person get in? And the three of us know from having read applications and knowing lots of college decision-making processes that those other kids met institutional priorities in some way that ended up trumping the standard strong kid. So the point of this all being, then, what can we do?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll stop there, Mark, and see what you guys say.
Yeah, because you teed up exactly what I was thinking. How many times have I had this conversation with families, and unless you have a what can you do, then, all you did is just discourage people. Right. And so obviously one thing we're all going to do as responsible counselors is we're going to make sure that the list is balanced, and we're going to have those conversations, and we're going to make sure that we find schools that aren't as competitive, that the student has a better chance of standing out. And a lot of times it's very difficult because those are names that the family doesn't necessarily think of as the caliber that they're hoping for. So then we spend a lot of our time building up those schools. And sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not in the minds of the person. I find there's a correlation between the family that values excellence because they think it'll be a springboard to opportunities versus the family that wants a name that will land well in their social circles and raise eyebrows. When I'm working with the former, you can make a lot of progress. It's a lot harder if the goal is a certain shock factor that, I got in this or my kid got in this. That's always going to be a lot harder because they're evaluating it strictly off of the scarcity model. Some of those families will come to us and say, I just can't find any probables or likelies. I can find reach schools and it can't find, because they're looking for that. But that's just list building isn't sufficient enough for what they want to hear, or quite honestly, what we can do with some of the tools I think that we have. The other thing you hear me say a lot on the podcast is colleges want what they don't have. And one of the things, I've been really going back and looking at who are the kids that get into the most selectives. And like you said, Susan, a lot of times we see it coming ahead of time. We won't always know for sure you're getting in X school, but we'll know that you'll be able to get in probably a school of that type of selectivity just because we've been doing this long enough. But one of the things that I see that does differentiate those kids is they're rare in that applicant pool because the most competitive schools have so many applicants. The question then becomes, who's bringing something to our community that every other kid isn't bringing? Now, what I've noticed is more families start this process earlier than before. And there's pros and cons of that. One of the pros is you do have some more time to find the sweet spot between what is somebody's authentic interests and gifts, and then how can you help them work with their authentic interests and gifts and not make them just look like every other applicant. I tell this story frequently when I'm in the counseling room. It just comes from sitting in Emory's file reading process. So this is in relation to an essay, but it's a concept that we could talk about and expand it. And so they do paired reading or CBE. So two people sitting together. Essay comes up. One person says, 6th time I've read this essay this week. Other person says, missed opportunity. Now that was something with just some different guidance the student could have chose to accentuate a different component of who they were and bring out some of the things that are both authentic to who the person is, but are appealing to the school, either because they make certain personal qualities pop, or they bring out some unique interests. Schools also like people who are interesting and unique. And so you bring out some of the unique and interesting things that they don't see. I like to describe it as like seasoning on your food. You have that seasoning on the food that just makes the food taste better. And those are some of the things that I'm finding I'm working on more with students, because you get a student, and I'll just be really transparent here. Some people are coming from overrepresented demographics, especially for their major. And you know that the school has just seen a ton of kids from that demographic with that same interest. Well, we can't just completely change their interest. That's who they are. But what are some things that we can do to maybe make them unique? And sometimes it's really getting very specific. Instead of just saying, I want to be a doctor or I want to do robotics. Okay, how can we really micro down and find something very unique that you have interest in? None of us are ever trying to change who the person is. I know Susan, I know Carter, they wouldn't be on this podcast if they weren't committed to sort of authenticity. We're never trying to do that, right? I'll say to my families, okay, you're walking down the aisle, you didn't get plastic surgery the day before, and you didn't put an imposter in your place. It's going to be the you, it's going to be the genuine you, right? But you're probably going to have the tux or the dress looking nicer, the hair, the shoes. Like, there are things that you can do, and they fall in the realm of what's appropriate and what colleges would expect you to do without changing the core of who the person is. Those are some things that I'm finding when I'm working with my students. We have to accentuate what is unique and interesting about you that's not going to make you look like every other applicant, but it's also authentic. Carter, I'd love to know your thoughts. Both Susan and I have had a little 10 to 15 minute monologue here. Chime in with anything you're thinking.
Yeah, for sure. You all are articulating so well a lot of the things that I think about and that I put into practice. I loved, Susan, the way that you articulated the perception that this can be a rewards-based process, right? And analogizing that to promotions at work. And interestingly enough, I think that the work-related analogy that's most apt in this situation is hiring. Right, where you can be extremely qualified, but I'm sure that most of us who have been adults for a while now, or even maybe not a while, have applied to a job that we could absolutely do and be very good at, and just not even gotten a response. And that, I think, is the same fundamental idea that's at play here. And I also thought it was so interesting when Susan, you described an above average student as being bread and butter. I know exactly what you mean, but it would feel inherently contradictory for those two things to go together. But as you're noting, we're talking about these highly rejective schools with single digit admit rates. And so someone who is in the top quarter of the applicant pool can still be very average in a sense, can still not necessarily pop, as we're saying, in terms of the the evaluation of their application. And before I guess I get into some of those practices that Mark you're talking about, I also, I guess, want to just check in on a definition of terms in a way, because I think that we're talking about a group of kids that don't fulfill any institutional priorities necessarily, right? The general institutional priority is we want strong students, successful students, that, yes, and that institutional priority can be filled many times over from most of these highly rejected schools' applicant pools. But as you noted, right, if you're being recruited for a sport, if you are representing a background that a school may want more of, those are students who are then fulfilling these institutional priorities. And so to me, kind of the question, if you're not, if you're trying not to come across as a standard strong applicant, is how can you be fulfilling an institutional priority, or how can you get as close to fulfilling an institutional priority as possible? And so, to me, in a way, the idea of standard strong, almost does, when I'm talking about an application, not a person, it feels to me like it does have a kind of qualitative element to it, and that within this broader pool of students who don't fulfill any institutional priorities, there are those students who can kind of still elevate their applications. They maybe don't fully embody an institutional priority, but they're compelling in some way. And whether that institutional priority is having really fascinating, unique thinkers, or whether that institutional priority is, having more French majors, in some way, if they're able to do that, to me, then that application no longer is standard strong. And for me, when I look back on, outcomes that maybe don't make sense to the rest of my community, my school community, because a kid is so strong, but maybe didn't get the kinds of decisions that everyone expected them to get. To me, that's because, all of us on their team, we just never got to be able to help them clearly articulate and identify what those things were that could sort of elevate them from the mass of great kids who do wonderful things. It's at a lot of these places, it's not enough anymore to be a valedictorian, to get a perfect SAT or ACT score. A lot of the ways that I frame this when I'm talking with the students that I work with is, in what ways do you go above and beyond, to pursue your passions or your interests? This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a spiky student, right? A student who has an extreme level of depth in one particular area, though that can, to my mind, be something that could elevate a student out of the standard strong mass. But I think seeing that a student is seeking out ways to dig deeper in an area of interest or to explore new areas of interest, a lot of times, if you're going through your experience of school, in a sense, and just kind of checking off all of the boxes, getting all of the best grades that you can, but not going above and beyond, that's going to lead you to a lot of really wonderful admits, and it's going to still keep you from being invited into one of those most highly rejective institutions. And if you think about it with the work analogy, I think it's kind of similar still, where, if you're in your job and you're doing everything you're supposed to do, you're great. You're a great employee. But the ways to really, move forward, if that's something that I think you're thinking of, is to take initiative, right? To take on more leadership roles, to kind of go above and beyond what the written expectations are of the job. Unfortunately, I think, for high schoolers, that's now a big part of it. And so to me, what I'm talking about with students, I love, Mark, the way that you talk about kind of assessing what their authentic interests and gifts are, but helping them be able to see how to sharpen those a little bit, both in terms of the presentation, but potentially also, if I'm meeting with a junior, as a lot of us are doing right now in this part of the process, what are some of the things you can do over the summer to go a little bit further in what your area of interest is? If I'm chatting with a freshman or a sophomore, let's think about a plan that you might want to put together. And this is not me kind of feeding them things. This is not me trying to inauthentically add things to their resume. This is me trying to inspire them to think bigger about what already exists inside of them, to say, where can you take this thing that you have that you maybe didn't even realize you could do? But, can we go out and do some political advocacy around the issue that you're passionate about? Or can you bring your love of economics and finance to marginalized communities who may not know, have access to the same information that you do? What are the things that you can do where you're taking what's already inside of you and going above and beyond? Because I think, in a sense, unfortunately, above and beyond is the new expectation for those most selective places. Obviously, if students don't do that, they still are going to land at some really outstanding, wonderful institutions. This is not a thing that I think that they have to do in order to get into college, which I think is what a lot of students hear and believe. But I think that if what we're talking about is, 7% admit rate school, or less, that's a lot of those students are going to fill some sort of institutional priority. And so being able to identify, to make yourself, get closer to something like that is going to help you stand out a little bit.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of 5. Hope you join us on Thursday for part 2 of 5. All right, friends, let's transition to part 1 of Lisa's interview with Jennifer Gershberg.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 1 of Lisa's interview with Jennifer Gershberg, Lisa gives an overview of Jennifer's background. Jennifer talks about the circuitous path she took in her career. Jennifer talks about why so many students are not prepared for college. Jennifer explains the value of writing handwritten notes and the value of reading paperback or hard copy books over reading on the screen, and the value of study guides. Jennifer gives some great time management tips. Jennifer talks about the responsibility that is on the student to build a relationship with their college professors. Listen and enjoy.
Hi, this is Lisa. I am a host on the Your College Bound Kid podcast, and I am here today to talk with Jennifer Gershberg, who is an expert in preparing for college in terms of academic study skills. Welcome to the podcast, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
And just a little background about Jennifer. She is a campus and keynote speaker. She's a course creator, and she's a former University of Maryland College Park professor. Through her campus programs, keynotes, trainings, and online courses, she helps prospective and current college students build confidence and competence by teaching them the fundamental skills they need for academic and professional success. And Jennifer's had a fair amount of academic and professional success herself. She attended Cornell University and the George Washington University Law School, and as I said, was a professor at University of Maryland. So Jennifer, tell us, what I always like to ask guests, how did you get here? What is the path you took? Because I think it's great for parents and students to hear that it's usually not linear. And I don't know if yours was or wasn't, but
mine was not at all. It was totally circuitous. And I always, tell students this because they often will come to me very stressed out about their path and where they want to go. And I tell them usually things are not going to be as predicted 20 years later. So I was no exception to that. I went to law school straight from college. I practiced law for a few years, and then I found myself with 3 kids under the age of 3. I had a 3-year-old and twin newborns. And so I took some time off to get my bearings, and then I missed working very much. And I wanted to go back to work, but I decided to transition to academia at that time because it really took everything I had enjoyed about litigation, which was the area of law I had practiced, but it left behind the aspects I hadn't liked. So that was the first sort of major transition. It allowed me, moving to academia allowed me to focus on collaboration and research and writing and teaching and the student engagement, which was the best part of the job for me. But it wasn't adversarial, as litigation obviously was. That is all litigation is. So it was really great and suited my personality, I think, quite well, and my skills. So I moved to University of Maryland, where I taught in the business school. I had thousands of students throughout my time there. I had about 400 students per year because I taught business law and business ethics. So I was still using my legal education and background and skills, but in this different context. And I really enjoyed teaching. But after many years there, I found that student skills had really declined. This really is something I noticed post-pandemic, although I'm not blaming the pandemic entirely for this pattern because there are many factors. But I noticed that students had sort of fallen off a cliff in terms of study skills, time management skills, professional skills, networking, communication, and general engagement. And that concerned me enough to inspire me to resign so that I could help reach students throughout the country and not just in my classroom. And so that's what I do now through my campus talks, through my course, through my parent talks, and other programming. I really try to teach students these fundamental skills that are so important for their success.
That's great. And we're going to talk about some of those skills today. And I think the first area, obviously, we're going to focus on is academics. And yeah, I watched Jennifer's course and I was just amazed at how she was able to take things that were sort of implicit or that I'd kind of figured out over the years and make them very explicit and actionable. And so, I really thought that was super helpful. But what are some of the things that a student needs to do to be prepared academically for college?
Well, there are reasons. I mean, to answer that question, I think it's important to understand the reasons students are largely not prepared going in. So, first of all, there is sort of widespread grade inflation at the high school level, even in rigorous high schools, even in rigorous classes. There is tremendous grade inflation across high schools. And so the problem is that students largely haven't developed the study skills they will need to succeed in college, where grade inflation is less common. So students really need to learn active study strategies. They have to learn distraction management, which is more a time management issue, but that goes right along with study skills. It's so important. And it's really hard. I don't envy students these days with the technology, with the social media, with everything being digitized. It is actually really bad for learning. And there is tons of research to support that. And so making things less digital, writing things out, reading from hard copy, studying actively, and utilizing certain study methods, I think are going to be really important for students heading into college. And unfortunately, as I said, most students have not had to do these things in college. So, they may have in high school, sorry. So they may have gotten all A's in high school and they go to college and they think they are all set. And it turns out, unfortunately, often not to be the case.
Yeah, that is a rude shock, I think, for kids when they get there and realize that they don't know what to do.
It's really overwhelming for them. And then they get, that sort of feeds into their anxiety in general and the huge anxiety rates we're seeing on college campuses. It all plays in.
Mm-hmm. So I loved about your philosophy that you go old school. Back to the spiral notebook and the pen. Talk to us a little bit more about why doing things on paper, writing with your hands, that kind of thing helps learning.
So handwriting notes as opposed to typing them increases the neural activity to the part of the brain that is responsible for retention and comprehension. In addition, reading from a book, like an actual hard copy book, as you and I did growing up, lends itself to deep reflection and thought, whereas reading from screens encourages a task completion, sort of scanning, rushed process. And that's just not conducive to critical thinking or learning. And so, in all these different respects, going old school is better for learning. And there is a great researcher named Jared Cooney Horvath. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but this is his whole body of research, and he's incredible. I would definitely advise people to read about him and follow his work. But he has established this time and again. The digital age is ruining learning. It's a huge problem.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And we can't get rid of it though, right? I mean, there are ways we can use it to help learning, but the problem is that it's misused.
Right.
And it's used as a shortcut and it doesn't work.
Right. So I was talking to a student the other day, and he gets kind of anxious about his homework, and he'll flip over to ChatGPT, and then the homework looks great, but then it comes time for the test and he is completely confused about what to do. And I think that just happens a lot in schools now. Can you give us just one example of an old school tactic that you recommend that kids do?
Well, I would recommend, honestly, one really good recommendation is to make their own study guides. This is something I detail in my course that I've been told is, a really helpful tip, where you actually write out, and you can type this out too. This is fine, but you're synthesizing information topically throughout the course so that you can understand all of the concepts and context, understand the relationships to one another, without ChatGPT doing the work for you, because the act of creating the study guide is what leads to actual learning. Having a tool do it for you does not. Also, I mean, you can take something like Quizlet, which all the kids use these days. I don't like Quizlet. I always recommend that students use old school index cards. I need to get a sponsorship with the index card companies. I swear, I tell everyone to buy them. But truly, it makes such a difference to write out your index cards, because again, writing out the material is what leads to understanding. And flipping through a Quizlet really quickly on a screen doesn't do it the same way. So these are the types of things that I wish students would go back to more and more. And when they do, they find incredible success.
Right. Yeah. And the idea of just trying to study for the final throughout the course is, I think, obviously, right? But also kind of revolutionary, because people don't typically do that. They sort of wait until the end to kind of put it all together.
And that's also a time management issue. So in the course, I talk a lot about exactly how to structure their time, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, let's talk about time management. So tell us what you think that students aren't doing and maybe a direction they could go in.
So the biggest issue, students haven't been tested in high school when it comes to time management. They are very busy in high school, but their parents are riding them, often micromanaging their time. Every hour is sort of accounted for. They have homework in each class for each day. They have sports. They're very busy hour to hour. In college, that's not the case, of course. You can have a day where you have no class or one class and nothing until 4:00, and your parents hopefully aren't there micromanaging how you're spending your time. And there's far less professor oversight, of course. So it's really on the students to structure their time appropriately. And that is what we see they're not doing as well. When they have large periods of free time, they don't structure it in an intentional, thoughtful way. So I always say that they should sit down at least once a week and go through. I like Sunday nights for this, but it could be any time that makes sense for them. But to go through the week and to plan out each day. And I like to have a to-do list each day with actionable tasks. So it isn't something like study psychology. It's, read chapter 3 in psychology and make note cards for it or something like that, like very specific structure. That makes all the difference in the world. And it's something students typically don't know to do or don't end up doing.
Yeah. I mean, how I love a process goal, right? And that's definitely a process goal. Instead of like saying like get an A on the psychology test, like, like these are direct operational things that you can do. And then, you do all that stuff and hopefully the test goes well. But if it doesn't, like you did what you could, right?
Exactly. Like you control the input. You don't control the result when it's in part up to someone else,
Right.
but you can just control what you can.
Yeah, I think that that's so important with time management. At my kids' school, they give every kid a planner, and no kid ever uses their planner. And it just drives me nuts because they give you this beautiful planner and you could be writing in it all year, and most of them don't even know where it is. And so,
Yep.
like, I think they're able to get away with their skate by with that kind of thing in high school. But in college, like, there aren't all these reminders. You're not going to class every day where it's written on the board, you know. So that's a
Absolutely.
huge tip. So managing your time is really important. What's another thing that's important in terms of managing, let's say, relationships with your professors or, taking care of yourself at school?
Well, so relationships with professors is another really big area in which students just haven't been tested yet. People come to college really understandably very intimidated. Often they are in a 200-person lecture. The professor doesn't know them, whereas in high school, of course, it was the teacher's job to know them. So there is much more responsibility placed on the student in college to develop and sustain good relationships with professors. So this really comes down to a few different things. I mean, students certainly need to manage what they do in the classroom. So to not be on their phones, you would be amazed the number of students in colleges who are texting during class, who are online shopping during class. It's terrible. It's terrible for learning, of course, and it's rude and not respectful. And the professors can always see those students. Even in a 200-person lecture, you can see sort of like who's trying to hide the phone under the table. And some don't even hide it. I mean, they're just out doing it. So if you're rude in class in these ways, or if you're falling asleep in class or coming routinely late, those things are going to set the first impression. And day after day after day, that's the impression your professor will have. And the chances of developing a good relationship from there are very low. Whereas if you're behaving properly in class and participating thoughtfully and remaining relatively engaged, that already, sets the stage for a great relationship. And then I'd say go to office hours, of course. Students are scared to go to office hours, and many only go to dispute a grade. That's, and by all means, dispute the grade if you have a basis to do so. But in terms of the relationship, you're much better off going a few times throughout the semester, and having a conversation either about the topics in the class, but even if you don't have questions about the material, have good conversations, talk about the topics, ask your professor, what drew you to academia? What drew you to this area? How do you have any advice for me? Professors love to give advice. They think they are very smart. Often they are. And they like to guide students who are interested in the guidance. So take advantage of that knowledge and go and have conversations. And this will lead you to a deeper relationship. And the professor will like you and will be invested in you because they've now spent time mentoring you. And the reason this matters is the professors are so helpful when it comes to letters of recommendation, either for graduate school or jobs. Many times they'll introduce students they like to their networks, to their contacts. They help them get jobs. many professors had jobs in industries before going to academia. So they're very, very good resources. And for research, of course, as well. So professors are there to help, and students, when they play their cards right, can really get a lot out of them.
Mhm. How can students get over their fear of talking to professors or adults? Because I see that a lot.
It's really common. Yes. Okay. So the first thing is to do small things. So I would recommend first, like after the first day or two of the class, go up to the professor after class and just say, "Hi, I'm Jennifer. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm really looking forward to your class." That's not, I mean, hopefully it may seem intimidating, but that is not a really difficult conversation to have, right? It's a basic introduction. So to start sort of small, but that will immediately sort of like soften it for future and pave the way for future communications because you've already introduced yourself. And it will give your professor an immediate positive first impression. So I would recommend starting small like that at the beginning. And there are other students around then, and you're standing up. So it's really quick. It's not like a whole sit down conversation for your first time. Second, you've got to realize you're in college to learn and grow. You're not in college to prove that you are perfect. And you're not in college to sort of like have everyone think you know everything. You're there to learn. You're there to build your network. So you've got to practice doing it and realize that that is why you're there. And so it's important to push outside your comfort zone. It is difficult. I can't really make it easy because it naturally just is hard when we are in a new setting and in a new situation. It's hard to do new things, but you've got to tell yourself that you belong there as much as anyone else. And you're there to stretch yourself and to push yourself and to do these things. And the professor is there to support your growth.
Yeah, like they're literally paid to do that. And they want to get to know you and, support your growth. Yeah.
They do. And also, I would say, I mean, let's keep it real. Some professors are nicer than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some are more approachable than others. So pick a nice one.
Mm-hmm.
Don't throw yourself in the deep end like with a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
There are some you could just avoid more, but a lot are really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So pick one who seems reasonable and start there. And the more you do it, honestly, the better you get at it.
Yeah. No, I find that like as a parent, I learned so much from being a parent to my kids. And with my oldest daughter, she's incredibly extroverted and she's really attractive too. And so as a young child, 2, 3, 4, she would talk to everyone. And they would talk to her, of course, and they would respond very positively to her because, who wouldn't? And here's me, her mom, very introverted, lots of social anxiety. And so I was forced daily, several times a day, to talk to random strangers. And after about 6 months, I realized nothing bad has happened to me. And now I can talk to anybody, but she...
And now you host a podcast. You literally do talk to anybody.
But she boot camped me, I feel like.
Love that.
So, I could rent her out. No. But yeah, it definitely just is exposure and practice. And if you just keep making yourself do it, eventually it'll be comfortable. So
that's right.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of Lisa's interview with Jennifer. Hope you join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Thursday's episode, we'll have a question from a listener, but I'm keeping it a mystery. You're going to have to show up on Thursday to find out what it is. We'll then have part 2 of the roundtable discussion that you heard part 1 of today with Carter and Susan. Standard Strong. And if you're Standard Strong, what can you do? And then our college spotlight. We'll have part 3 with Grace Robertson Lloyd from Grinnell College as she helps us understand Grinnell College. Friends, I have to tell you, there's nothing that makes you happier as a teacher than when your students quote back something that you've said. And I actually get a real charge. A lot of times I'll be talking to podcast listeners and they'll say to me, it's not where you go. And I start smiling. Chiclets just popping, like big beaming. I just love it. And that happened to me this week. So I met with a student I was working with in North Carolina, and she's about to make her big announcement and make her decision. And she hasn't quite told the school yet, but we were just talking about all her choices and going over them. And she says something to me in the session. She says, yeah, I could work a wait list, but you taught me love the school that loves you back. And I'm smiling because I kind of, I love it. She's like embracing this. And then she goes one step further. She said, there's a lot of students at my school that are walking around moping because they never got in maybe their first choice school. And I'm telling all of them, love the school that loves you back. So friends, it's decision time now. And that's my words of wisdom for today. Love the school that loves you back. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.